So Amazon MGM Studios, of course, the film branch of Amazon, right? They have finally secured complete creative control over the James Bond franchise. Now that I'm saying it out loud, I don't know if that applies to the entire media franchise or just the movies, but I think the whole franchise. I got a quote here from Barbara Broccoli, and yes, that is her last name, of the Broccoli family, who is the main producer of the franchise up to this point, saying, quote, "My life has been dedicated to maintaining and building upon the extraordinary legacy that was handed to Michael and me," Michael's her stepbrother, "Michael and me by our father, producer Cubby Broccoli," and that is his name. I think Cubby was a nickname. I think his real name is Albert. We have had the honor of working closely with 4 of the tremendously talented actors who have played 007 and thousands of wonderful artists within the industry. With the conclusion of No Time to Die, which is the last Bond movie from, I think, 4 years ago, that and Michael retiring from the films, I feel it's time to focus on my other projects, end quote. So the way this is going to work is that the Broccoli family, who has controlled the franchise, the film franchise for decades, but now I think it was like the 2010s, they secured the rights to the entire IP. They will still co-own the intellectual property, but at this point now, Amazon will be calling the shots. They're going to be the one in the driver's seat, right? Amazon also put out a statement saying, quote, "We are honored to continue the treasured heritage and look forward to ushering in the next phase of the legendary 007 for audiences around the world," end quote. So, James Bond, one of the more iconic characters of English language media. Interestingly, because it's not this larger interconnected franchise with lots of characters, it really is just built around this one dude. And a lot of people don't know this. He's actually started as a literary character in a series of novels created by Ian Fleming, the author Ian Fleming, in the 1950s. The first book being Casino Royale in 1953, which of course got adapted into the first Daniel Craig film in like 2006, right? He's meant to be a Secret Service officer of MI6, Military Intelligence Section 6, right? So kind of like their version of like the CIA kind of. And of course his code number is 007. And again, people just think about the movies, but it's a multimedia franchise with the novels, the films. I mean, there have been video games. Famously, the GoldenEye video game from the 90s for the Nintendo 64 is very iconic within the video game sphere. So it's not as limited as a lot of people, I think, right? And if you don't like copyright or like how complicated copyright is, then you're not going to like this, right? So the rights surrounding James Bond is like a very strange web of rights holders, right? So, of course, the original book in the book series started in the 50s. In the 60s, it may have been in the late 50s, but in any case, producers Harry Saltzman and Albert R. Broccoli bought the film rights, which then became the first James Bond film, Dr. No, in 1962 with Sean Connery, right? And that jump-started the film franchise. They created a holding company called Danjaq, DANJAQ. I guess it was like a combination of each of their wives' names, like Dana and Jacqueline, just pushed them together, Danjaq, right? They created this holding company to retain the rights to the film franchise, right? In 1975, though, Saltzman sold his half of the company, or his stake in the company, to United Artists, right? Cubby Broccoli still controlled the company, but United Artists had a financial stake in the company now. But then things get complicated, because then in 1981, MGM, the historic film studio Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, buys United Artists in the early 80s. But again, at this point, Danjaq still controls the films. And like I had mentioned earlier, this holding company eventually acquired the rights to not just the films, but the books, like basically anything James Bond 007 branded. So that's kind of where it laid for a while. And then just a couple of years ago, MGM merged with Amazon Studios to create Amazon MGM Studios in 2023. And I say merge, but really that was an acquisition by Amazon. And one of the big reasons they wanted MGM was for James Bond, right? That was probably their most lucrative asset. Even though MGM didn't quite control the asset, it still had its hands in the pot, right? So a lot of people are reacting to this, and I think the big question is, what does this mean, right? Like, what is this going to mean for the James Bond franchise? And full disclosure, I'm not really a huge James Bond fan. The only one I've ever seen is the Casino Royale Daniel Craig movie from 2006, because my college roommate, one of my very good friends, Harvey, was British, and he loved James Bond, so he had us watch it, and I was kind of unimpressed. And that's supposedly supposed to be like the good one, or one of the really, really good ones. It just never quite appealed to me, but it is a very storied franchise, and a lot of people really care about this character, going off of more than a half century now at this point. And it was interesting because James Bond, like, if you were to ask ChatGPT, like, list the 50 most iconic film series, right? James Bond would probably be one of them, right? But interestingly, that would probably be the only one on the list that was not fully controlled by a major corporation, right? Not that every film franchise started at a major corporation, but at this point in the 2020s, the 20s, if you will, the roaring 20s, or more like the snoring 20s, right? This is one that, like, it wasn't Disney, it wasn't Universal, it was essentially this family, the Broccoli family. Once Cubby passed it on to Barbara and his stepson Michael, and they really began in earnest with the mid-90s GoldenEye, and they have been producing it ever since. And reportedly, the Hollywood Reporter notes that Barbara Broccoli described Amazon executives, this was back in the maybe a couple years ago, as quote unquote fucking idiots. Like, they were suggesting to have all these spin-offs and stuff, and she just was like, I guess it really irked her when they described James Bond as content, and kind of like devaluing it as just like this thing, the way that like a commercial is content, and it really rubbed her the wrong way. Film Speak critic Griffin Schill, responding to the news of this kind of, not hostile takeover, but Amazon now kind of gaining full control over this character. Griffin here said, quote, "This is quite possibly the worst thing to happen to this franchise. It will be milked dry," end quote. And again, that's kind of my concern as well. That's what these big corporations do, because they don't really care about the legacy of this. Because again, these executives are very short-sighted, just by nature of their position, because they're not going to live forever. But especially today, like, media executives don't, like they shuffle around a lot. Like, they don't spend a lot of time at one company. So oftentimes they are more concerned with the short-term profits and stock price increase, because, like, their compensation is directly tied to that. So they don't really care if it's going to dilute the brand, whereas, like, it was a big deal when a new James Bond movie was released, or even more so when a new actor was cast as James Bond. Like, that it's always been like a really big deal. And so it seems like people are concerned that, Amazon's gonna kind of do to James Bond what Disney did to Star Wars, where they just oversaturated it with mediocre content. Because Star Wars had always been oversaturated, but the content was at least interesting or different, or sometimes actually really, really good. Whereas modern Disney kind of just feels like, like, you occasionally get something kind of interesting, but it all kind of feels very samey, right? And again, are they going to try to follow through with the ideas they had suggested to Barbara Broccoli? Do they want to have some kind of connected universe? Because again, except for some of the Daniel Craig movies, which a lot of people didn't like about those movies, unlike those, the movies are typically standalone. Like, even if they feature the same actor, like, you could just watch any James Bond movie, and you don't necessarily need to know what happened in the last one. Whereas with some of the Daniel Craig movies, they tried to make it a little more serialized and kind of like more sequels to each other. And interesting, we got a quote here from Joe Russo, one half of the Russo brothers, of course, from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, doing, Captain America: Winter Soldier and Civil War and Infinity War and Endgame. He put out a quote, a tweet or whatever it was, saying, in response to this, saying, quote, "Don't," in all caps, "don't Cinematic Universe James Bond. It is one of our last great theatrical events. Don't dilute that with a plethora of streaming spin-offs," end quote. So that kind of seems almost like a little jab at his former and now returning employer, because now the Russo brothers are doing Avengers 5, Avengers Doomsday, right? And there is this concern, not just hypothetical, but Amazon. We've seen what Amazon has done with like legacy property. So they don't own necessarily all the rights to everything, I believe, but famously Amazon got the rights to make Middle Earth content like Lord of the Rings, and they did that show, The Rings of Power, which got middling critical reaction. Like everyone was kind of like, at best it was good, and at worst it was meh, right? So it's not like Amazon necessarily has this amazing track record with taking this legacy content and not just doing like the cynical, low-hanging fruit version of it. And again, Bezos, interestingly, Jeff Bezos, like once this was announced, posted on X, he asked his followers who they would want to see cast as James Bond. Which again, I mean, on one hand, like, okay, it's cool you're democratizing this process perhaps, but what it betrays, I think, is a sense of, like, again, these corporations have no creative vision. And the Hollywood Reporter notes that back when Daniel Craig was cast, it was met with a lot of backlash, because he was more of, like, a very different kind of look for James Bond, notably because he was blonde. James Blonde was, like, the big headline. Like, every newspaper, that was the headline when it was announced, James Blonde, ? But the Broccoli family saw something in him and took a creative swing. And it begs the question, would Amazon be so bold? Because, again, I'm not really... But people who like James Bond have all agreed that Daniel Craig ended up being a really fantastic James Bond. So it's people are pretty bearish on Amazon, actually having a vision. Rather than just casting like whoever focus tests the best with audiences. But this raises the interesting question, right? Who would be or could be the new Bond? A couple names that were being thrown out in the trades and doing my research, people like Tom Hardy could be good. Idris Elba has always been a fan favorite idea. Though people were like, you can't do that. He's black. James Bond's supposed to be black. And Barbara Broccoli even once said like, she would be fine with race bending the character, though she notably said she wouldn't want to gender swap the character. Kind of saying the same thing I've always said, where she's like, and I'm gonna kind of paraphrase what she said and kind of put my spin on it, of like, it's kind of almost insulting, where it's like the only big iconic characters for women can they only just be the sloppy seconds, like a character that has traditionally been a man. Like, we can't create new, interesting, iconic characters for women to play. And so that was kind of where Barbara Broccoli was coming from. Like women could do better than doing Jane Bond, right? And she also said, like, it would kind of rob, like, the character is about masculinity, or like idealized masculinity. At least in her words. I don't know if she means like literally this is how men should be, but I think her point is that like it kind of encapsulates what we think of as masculinity. So to make James Bond a woman would kind of like rob the character of like this essential piece. Something that race bending would not do, right? You can make him black and he's still a man, right? But the big one that seems a bunch of people really want is Henry Cavill, right? Of course, was our Superman for a time in the DCEU, in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, all of that. And interestingly, he originally auditioned back in the 2000s for Casino Royale, but lost out to Daniel Craig, notably mostly just because he was too young at that point, right? So a lot of people are kind of like, and I think his audition tape has been released online, and people are like, shit, like, he was really good. It's a shame they couldn't, it just didn't work out in that time. At this point, it's like 20 years ago. So is he now too old? I don't know. But a lot of people seem to be pointing to him as like maybe he could be someone, especially now that his schedule's freed up after leaving The Witcher and leaving Superman, right? So he could be a good choice, I guess, for that. Again, I really have no skin in the game because I really have no affinity for this character. Viviana here writes in the live chat, I heard that Daniel Craig said he would rather eat glass than be Bond again. Don't remember why, but even he is against the ultra franchising, end quote. Yeah, and that'd be something I would have to look up is how many, I wonder if I look up like list of actors who have played James Bond. Oh, it's not coming up. Shit! Because I wonder if there's like a breakdown of like how many people have played. Oh, here we go. Portrayal of James Bond in film. I wonder, is there like a tally of like who had the most. Oh, it doesn't say. That's unfortunate. I would imagine. So I think Sean Connery has the most because he was in like 6 or 7 of these movies. But again, like by making it serialized the way they did with the Daniel Craig movies, again, it kind of did make it like this ongoing story, which was never the intention. Like it was almost kind of always like it is James Bond. It was always kind of like Sherlock Holmes, in that like again you could kind of just jump into any story and you're not really following like a specific continuity. I wonder when Daniel Craig said that, because it's interesting because I think he said that, like, and then he made another one. So, I think he's been in 5, right? Because he was in Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, Spectre, and then No Time to Die. So I think it was after Spectre. He probably said, like, I'd rather eat glass. That was 2015, and then I think then they made No Time to Die in 2021, because they probably were like, we'll give you, like, $1 gajillion. He was like, all right, fine, I'll do it. So yeah, I wonder how he feels about it. I think he's probably just like, I would rather just go do something else, more interesting and different, right? Because the guy's been doing it for 15 years now. So I think he's ready to. I mean, we already knew he was not coming back, but now we really know, like, okay, this is a new direction for the franchise, and it'll be interesting to see where Amazon takes it, but just because it'll be interesting doesn't mean it will be good. Wow, what an interesting story. I'm sure you have some thoughts about the topic, so comment below, let me know what you think. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really, really helps people find the channel and makes me feel all warm inside. Until next time, I'm Peter Mancuso. Peace out.